Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So this afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome Kate Weiss. So welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to doing this.
Thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for fitting me into not only a busy schedule, but definitely a chaotic one from the sounds of it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. But anyone that doesn't know who you are, you just want to give us a bit of a background on yourself, what you've done previously, and what you do in LA.
Sure. So my name is Kate, and I'm actually from Los Angeles, which is pretty cool to be back. I did my undergrad out here at USC in kinesiology, which is kind of where I got my start. I was interning in football, American football, in strength conditioning, and I just loved it. And then my senior year, I took a biomechanics course, and that just blew my mind, and things took off. And then I ended up moving to Indiana to go to Ball State, and that was a pretty cool experience. They had a really amazing biomechanics lab, and did a ton of research there as a research assistant, and looked at the impact of fatigue on lower extremity mechanics during sidestepping. So I was looking at women actually, because they have a higher incidence of ACL. I had their soccer and field hockey teams. And then I was the strength coach for men's tennis. So it was kind of a nice blend. And then after that, I knew that I wanted to kind of keep going. I had a lot of questions in terms of mechanics and movement and injury risk. And I wanted to find a way to take what I did outside of the lab, because while the lab was super informative, it was just a quick snapshot, and it took a while to turn the results around. And I knew in professional sports and even in NCAA here, like, you don't have that kind of time. So through a friend, I found out about the sports science PhD program at Auckland University of Technology, and I told myself, if you get a scholarship, you're going. And I did. So I moved to New Zealand, and I studied there, and I was doing my research on quantifying and understanding lower extremity load in their professional men's basketball team. So amazing experience using wearables to quantify differences between sides and in terms of load in the lower extremities during practice and games. And during that, I got to travel a lot and do a lot of the different conferences and present my research and meet a lot of people here, actually. So many of the professional teams send people from their organization now to these conferences so they can stay on the cutting edge with research and apply it. And I met a lot of people that way. And when I ended up graduating and moving back, I was doing a bit of consulting and ended up meeting the director of performance here at the Dodgers, and now here I am.
Good story. I actually visited USC to visit the sports science guys before they headed out to the Seahawks in January 19. And for a Brit to go over there and see them kind of facilities was absolutely incredible. Absolutely. Yeah, it was great. Great place. Just the vibe of the whole place. We had some food in the canteen area, which, like, again, just blew my mind, with the kind of the dark canteen area with the music blasting out. It was great. Yeah, the whole experience was brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a beautiful campus and such a great program.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was it like living in New Zealand for a American?
I love New Zealand.
Yeah.
Such a unique culture. And one of the things that I love, especially being in this field, is the country loves sports.
Yeah.
They live for it. I remember during the World Cup when I was there, it was over where you are, and so the time difference was insane. They would start school late. They would open banks late. People would be getting up at 3 a.m. You'd see the lights on in the neighborhood because everyone was watching the game. Yeah. And it was such a cool thing too, because the All Blacks won that year.
Yes. Was that 2015? 2015?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So such a unique experience being there, and just even at the university where I was, there's always like countdowns to the Olympics, countdowns to the Commonwealth Games, countdown, to the world, and everything was just so focused on sports, and the people are so warm there. I remember when I moved there, someone was like, "Oh, do you need to borrow my car?" And I thought, that would never happen.
No. Yeah.
If someone offered me their car, I'd be like, "What's going on?
What's wrong with it?"
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
So one thing that's been very much in my mind the last couple of weeks, and that's off the back of a podcast that I did probably 6 weeks ago now, and that was with Brian Gearity, Sophia Nimphius, and Lorena Torres. And that was about the barriers for females in strength and conditioning or sports science. So I'd like to put that to you as well, and just get your experiences of being a female in a very male-dominated industry, and see if there's any stories that potentially you could share with us.
Yes. So I was very lucky. A mentor I had back in undergrad told me from the get-go, he's like, "You're going to come up against barriers. That's just the way the world is. But they're only barriers if you let them be barriers." So I kind of kept that in the back of my mind, and I just made sure that when I showed up like I knew I should be there, and acted from that place. And even here, coming into baseball, I never played softball. I have no baseball experience. And this is very much a sport where players become coaches, and most of the people working in baseball at some point played. So I knew coming in, I had a lot to learn, and that I was working with people that this was their life, and this is what they had always known. So making sure that I came in from a place of being supportive and understanding and trying to learn from them, and have them know that I was there to support them. I wasn't trying to change everything. I wasn't trying to make their lives harder. I was there to help in any way I could. And I asked a lot of questions, and I humbled myself a lot, asking questions that were at times a bit embarrassing, just with a lot of the sports jargon. There's a lot of funny terms in baseball. And I would, just walk in and be like, "Hey, what does this mean?" And they would all laugh because it was funny. And that's kind of how I set the tone. And I just, in the back of my mind, I knew, like, I worked really hard to get here. I'm an expert at what I do, and I can add value. And as long as I'm coming to things from that place, I find that I don't have a lot of issues as a woman. There's always the small things, just like when you go places, there's not facilities for women. I don't have my own locker room. Thankfully, the guys, we have a setup that's really great, and they've always been really open and welcoming to me. So that's definitely helped. But I always have in mind, like, that I need to be respectful of the fact that they're used to just having guys around here. Mm-hmm. So I try not to make it uncomfortable or anything like that. So perhaps maybe just being a little bit more mindful of the situation has been maybe the biggest thing, whereas maybe if I was a man, that wouldn't be something I had to think about as much. But yeah, thankfully, like, it's been pretty smooth, and I've had a lot of great support kind of all throughout my career up to this point. So it's been really good.
How were the guys with you when you first came in, apart from enjoying the fact that you didn't know all the terms and things?
The guys have been great, actually. They're really nice, and I think, do a really good job with scouting and all of that. So a lot of our guys are just really friendly and kind and warm. And for the Latin guys, I've been trying to take Spanish so that I can at least text with them in Spanish. Nice. I realized that was a barrier at the end of last year, that I felt I didn't have as close of a relationship with those guys. So I've been kind of working on learning Spanish to overcome that, and they've been really receptive. I just find with these guys, like, being there, listening, trying not to ask them for too much, since they get asked for so much throughout the day, has been kind of key. And having, my boss and my coworkers trusting and supporting me made the players, I think, a lot more comfortable with me as well.
Did you give yourself a certain amount of time to kind of try to understand the sport before trying to implement anything or tweak anything, or was it when you came in the role, was it almost like straight into the fire?
No, I definitely took a bit of time just to try and learn. I went to a pitching conference my second month with our pitching coordinator, which that was an interesting experience as a woman because I was the only woman there. And people would come up to me trying to figure out, like, is she a pitching coach? What does she do? And I had one person ask me, it's like, my daughter is 8 and she wants to be in sports. Like, what did you do to get here? And I was like, wow.
No pressure.
She's 8, just let her have fun. She'll figure it out. But I didn't, like, you forget sometimes and then you realize, like, oh, this is different. But yeah, a lot of learning, just a lot of trying to be around to see things, just spending time in the weight room, spending time upstairs in the training room, talking to our skills coaches and our strength coaches, and just trying to get a grasp on what they know from this area, what they don't know, and little ways that I could add something that might make their lives easier.
So one thing we spoke about beforehand, which I think is really interesting, especially coming from the UK, where it's pretty slightly different with where sports science sits, and it's pretty set where sports science is under a performance department, pretty a director of performance, head of performance, and you've got one strand at strength and conditioning, one strand sports science, or thereabouts. But what we were speaking about beforehand is sports science, especially in baseball, could sit under a couple of different verticals. So do you want to explain that to us and how that influences what you do day to day?
Of course. So for me personally, I am in the performance department, the strength and conditioning area. So my first points of contact are the strength coaches, and then medical, and then the skills coaches after that. Whereas there are some people in my position at other organizations that sit in the stats analytics department. So the information that they're providing to the people that they report to is slightly different because those people are coming from a different lens and a different approach. So I think it kind of really boils down to, like, what are the questions you're trying to answer with the data? And specifically, what are the questions that you're trying to answer for the people that you support? So for us, it's important to us, like, the player's job is to play. So my job is never to tell them not to play. And so strength, conditioning, medical, like, our job is to make sure that we give them as much as we can to ensure that they are able to play. So even if they're fatigued, what can we do on our end to help with that so that they can do their job? And that's kind of where we always go back to, is like, their job is to play and our job is to support them doing theirs. So how we approach that is quite different, I think, than, others, perhaps, depending on what their question and their motivation is around, what they're trying to do.
So when it comes to that question, what questions from a really high level are you actually trying to answer at this moment in time, or how's them questions developed over the time you've been there? It might be quite an interesting answer.
Yeah, so, our job and our main question is, are they ready to handle the demands of the sport? Baseball, they play almost every day. We have guys that play up to 20 consecutive games in a row before they get an off day, which, if you think about it, it's funny. I think before working in baseball, I didn't really have a true understanding or appreciation of just how much they do. And when you think about time on the field, that can be several hours a night. You're standing in cleats, you're running in cleats, you're swinging at a high speed, you're throwing at a high speed, you're turning double plays, you're sliding. Like, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot more, I think, activity and movement than we really realized until we kind of started to quantify what is happening on the field, especially for certain players in certain positions, and have we adequately prepared them for that. So making sure that we start with an understanding of, what are their needs and what do they need to be able to handle, and how much time do we have to get them there, and then how do we keep them there? Because, as you know, even with lifting weights, right, if you PR but then you don't maintain that level of strength, you lose it, right? And that's the same with adapting to load. So for us, it's making sure we get them to a point where no matter if they're playing 9 innings or 18, as it can happen, they're ready for that. And they're also ready to then play the next day. So those are kind of things that we start with is, okay, first, what are the needs of the sport? And then what do each individual player need? And then where are they at now? And week to week, how is that changing? How are they recovering? How are they adapting? And then from our end, we can tweak things from an S&C standpoint, from a recovery modality standpoint, maybe even supplementation, nutritional interventions, but things that we can do to make sure that they're resilient and able to handle what we have planned, or what it is that we're trying to plan and prepare them for.
Yeah. So when it comes to demands of the sport, and I'm going to put this on you now, but in terms of the different playing positions, what are they been expected to handle? I know you've mentioned a few of them. Actually, just time on feet been a basic one. But in terms of the demands that are put on these guys, for someone that knows zero about baseball, i.e. me, it'd be interesting to see what the demands for these guys are.
Yeah, so if you think about some of our outfielders, especially our center fielders, like a lot of your guys up the middle are going to get the most action. So your, pitchers and catchers are here, but then you have your second baseman, your shortstop, and your center fielder. A lot of balls are going to go up the middle that way, or they're going to be running to catch fly balls. So if you look at just their fielding, and then you look at if they're hitting well and they're getting on base a lot, our guys can cover a ton of distance. So if you think about it in terms of like bases as a distance from base to base is about 90 feet. Guys can cover 22 feet, like 22 bases in a game, or 2,200 feet. For some of these guys, they can have anywhere from 2 at bats to 8 at bats to 9 at bats. It just really kind of depends on how the game's being played and the opponent. So keeping all of that in mind, plus just time out on the field, anywhere from an hour to several hours every night. It's a lot. And you figure too, like that's just playing time, right? You still have batting practice or cage work. You have sometimes, fielding work or defensive work, or pitchers have, bullpens and all these other things, and relief pitchers pitch multiple nights in a row. There's just a ton that you have to be ready for. And so just keeping those things in mind with pitchers, your starting pitchers, the ones that are going to go, 5 to 7 innings, that would be like your endurance runners, right? And then your relief pitchers are your sprinters, short bouts, but they may sprint a couple days in a row. And so you have to have them ready for that kind of demand. So our strength and conditioning guys do a really great job of considering the different energy systems being used, building up tissue tolerance, and then, power, endurance, strength, all those things come into play in different aspects of the game. So making sure that our guys are ready for that is key.
We'll come on to the physical stuff in a minute, which I think will be really interesting. But from just what you've said, the psychological load of these guys is super, super high. Obviously, tons of traveling, repetition day after day after day after day, game after game. And then there's obviously practice in there, especially now with this condensed season. I'm guessing it's just go, go, go. So from a psychological standpoint, is there anything that you're doing that is assessing their readiness from a psychological point of view to actually be able to play and perform?
So we monitor, how their stress and perception of stress and energy and soreness and all of that is. There's also, for us, we provide an intensity score for games.
Okay.
So we consider, is this night 2 or night 3 for a reliever? What is the pitch count situation? Is it 2 outs and 2 runners on base already? Like where are we at in the season? What kind of additional psychological stress is there? We also quantify travel and the intensity of travel. So we look at both the amount of time and the intensity from the stance of, if you're a minor league player, you might have an 8-hour bus ride. and sitting down for 8 hours is pretty brutal.
You can get to that
Or
length of the country here with 8 hours.
yeah, you might have a 4 a.m. bus to catch a flight to then get off and you played till 1 a.m. and then you're going to get up and you're going to go and you're going to play that same night. Sometimes depending on our schedule, we might have a game, we finish at 11 p.m. They shower, they eat, they get on a plane, they wake up, they're 3 hours ahead in another time zone. So we definitely take those things into account because that adds that additional internal load. And then just, for us, talking to our guys, understanding where they're at, understanding for this player, this is, a lot more for him, or, maybe he's got a new baby at home. So when they're home in town, he's not sleeping as well. These are all kind of things that get factored into our intensity scores for these different things so that we have an understanding of where they're at. And we do try and stay on top of so-and-so's going through a breakup, especially at our minor league level. He may not be sleeping as well. His energy may be not where it needs to be. So just kind of more closely monitoring and checking in with those people is kind of how we like to do it. We find just with the psychological questionnaires, getting guys to do, a rescue that's 36 plus questions every 3 days, it's a lot to ask. Yeah. So we try to, as much as we can from our end, just make sure that we're touching base with our guys and understanding what's going on and noting that and making sure that everyone's aware, hey, this guy might be a little bit more tired this week, maybe a little bit more restorative work or recovery-based things, or he's not sleeping well, maybe we let him take a nap, give him a later start. All those kinds of things factor into what we do.
One thing that's getting talked about a lot, and I think it probably always has, and it's some of the stuff that you've just mentioned there in terms of just the communication with these guys. And one thing I find really interesting is that within itself, but how that then you have a chat with the player in a corridor because he's walking past and you realise that he kind of feels like he wants to speak to you about something, but how that actually gets translated into actual information that moves across the organization for people that want to know, and how it gets logged, analyzed, used for future reference, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't just stay as a conversation, it actually becomes something quantifiable. How do you guys go about doing that?
I guess that's probably the art.
Yeah.
So there's also the piece where, confidentiality for these players and trust is really important. So the more that they understand that we're there for them and that anything that they tell us is private and that we're going to make sure that we're doing what we need to on our end to support them. And that could be something subtle, or just say like, hey, I think this person could use a little bit more restorative work today, or hey, check in with this person to see how they're doing. It allows you to maintain that privacy for them, but also make sure that the people hands-on with them are using care and understanding that, hey, this person needs to be prioritized and we need to make sure that we're doing what we need to. And, things can manifest in so many different ways, especially with the psychological stress, right? Like stress is stress on the body. And whether it's from a really hard workout session or just a really emotionally taxing time, it impacts things. And even if I just said to you, like, hey, keep an eye on this guy, you might see that his mechanics have changed because he's tired, doesn't have the energy, or maybe he's not as, attentive when you're trying to get his attention or try to work on something. Like there's subtle cues and things that you can use to help guide how you care for each player. And that's something that our team is really good at. And for us too, our front office is extremely hands-on. I see them every single day. They're down here talking to players. They know our guys really well, and our guys, like them and trust them. So it's really helpful in that regard as well.
So coming back to the physical and the more external load monitoring, which that was your PhD. That's what you said for your PhD, wasn't it? Yeah. So what kind of things, what kind of tech have you got, and how do you utilize it from an external load point of view with the guys that you're working with?
Mm-hmm. So tech is very tricky at the professional level. Each different sport has so many rules around what can and can't be used.
Yeah.
Wearables are always very tricky, even with just incorrect information around wearables. We also have all of our players have agents, and agents, have the players' best interests in mind and want to protect them, but sometimes that can actually be harmful because they'll say like, hey, please don't, let them collect data because they feel like it might be used against the player. But from us, and at least in our organization, the data that I collect and the data that we use in terms of tech, that goes back to the strength coaches, and they use that to help improve training, protocols and things that we're doing to make these guys, as athletic as possible and as good as we can, and to maximize what we can. And it's not like something where the front office never asks me for a report on how high someone jumps or anything like that. For us on the S&C side, that's just a really good gauge of, lower body power, fatigue, things of that nature. So there's always this, balance with what we can and can't use, and then what we choose to use with that in mind. So I'm always very transparent about the data, and I allow the, players can see the data, they can see the group data. I always de-identify the rest of the group so that people feel comfortable and safe. But in game, we have a camera system, all of the stadiums do, that allows us to get, total distance, speed, acceleration, a lot of those like bat speed, things of that nature, velocity for pitches, things like that. So those are an easy way for us in game to get information. At our developmental level, we have a lot of different tools that we can use. Even, motion capture can be something you can use. A lot of teams use a lot of these different tools. So it's really kind of, what information do we need? How can we use it? But at the very basic level, I think because when I was in school, I wasn't with a team that had the kind of budget we have here. So from my perspective, I want it to be something that you can always quantify, that you don't have to rely on technology for. So a lot of what I do is pretty basic in terms of, session RPE as a means of quantifying load. And for us too, with that, it increases communication between groups with the developmental level. And even here as well, the strength coaches are the ones that log the numbers that I look at. So that has them speaking to skills coaches, your pitching coaches, your hitting coaches, field coaches, to have an understanding of, in the practice situation, what was this player doing today? And that communication is really good here and throughout the organization. So that allows us to kind of keep track of where guys are at and what they're doing in all the different areas, and to do so without being reliant on technology, which, as you know, can often not work the way you want it to.
Yeah.
You don't want to miss out on, important information. So for us, keeping it simple and having a very simple approach with quantifying workload and then being able to pull in extra things is helpful in that regard.
So in game, no wearables allowed in game?
There's a very short list. I want to say there's maybe 2 to 3 items.
Okay.
And yeah, for us, it's like a Whoop band I know is on there, which great, but that's more your internal load based on external load, right?
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily need that in the game per se. It's nice to have, but it's not necessary. And then, there's very few things. I think the list is quite short now. So we focus more on camera systems because we know we're going to have that no matter where we go. And then the stuff that we do ourselves.
Yeah, I didn't realize you had. Yeah, I didn't realize you guys had the camera systems, and I probably would have guessed there's some, but that's obviously mandatory in all stadiums, and that's shareable and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everybody has it, so it's pretty fair too, which is nice. There's not a situation where a team can't afford it kind of a thing. So I like that too. I think, well, it's nice to have an edge with stuff. I think it's more how you implement than anything. So I think as long as you have a system that allows you to use the information, collecting data that you can't do anything with is descriptive but not useful. So making sure that whatever we're looking at, we can use and do something from our end is kind of the way to go. So cameras are good and they're everywhere and we don't have to worry about it. So,
because I guess you can give 10 teams the same data and everyone's going to use it, manipulate it, pull out different things. So it doesn't really make a difference whether you've got the same or different, because it's pretty different anyway in the within each organization.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
and it's like when you think about it, right, player wise, like a player could bounce around to 5 organizations. They're all going to do differently because it's not just that one person, right?
Exactly.
It's the group. It's kind of the same thing with the data.
Exactly. So from an injury risk or mitigating injury risk point of view, is there anything that you guys are doing that has been particularly successful, or anything that you've moved away from that's not been particularly successful or not able to integrate within the structure of the organization?
I think there's a couple of things that we do really well. I think from mitigating the risk, having guys built up to be able to handle what they need to in game is critical, because even if you're strong, if you can't maintain that and you don't have the tolerance built up to maintain that for as long as they need to, eventually things are going to break down, right? And maybe they don't. There's always those players that can handle pretty much anything, and then there's guys that can't. So for us, making sure that that we've done everything we can on our end to build them up to where they need to be and keep them there. I think having a really good screening process in place. When we start spring training, we have spent a ton of time developing our assessment protocol that we do with every single player throughout the entire organization. And that helps shape what we do in the weight room, what we do on the field, how we condition them, and, what we're trying to work on to help improve, even swing performance, right? If you can't get into that position, it's going to be really hard to, coach is going to get pretty frustrated when they're like, oh, we're telling you to do it and you're not doing it. It's like, no, my body physically doesn't do that. So the more that we're able to use that as a way to kind of build our guys up and figure out foundationally what do they need, what needs to go into their, prep routines, all of that, I think those things have really made such a difference. And, the nice thing is too, is our guys have bought in. So they know that we're using that to help them get better. And we always try to make sure that we connect the things that we're doing back to what they're doing on the field. So we're not just trying to make them really good at squatting. Like, that's really not the case. They're really good at lunging, right? Like, we want you to move down the mound quickly. We want you to be able to swing and develop, create as much power as possible so you can hit it out of the park. And we want you to be able to sprint faster than anyone on any other team so that you can steal bases and you can get to balls more quickly. So the assessment process has been really key. And I work with some really smart people who have done a really great job on that. So getting all that information together, figuring out who needs what and what we can do, and also monitoring, tracking for improvements in those areas has been really, I think, something that's helped us tremendously.
Are you able to go into any more detail with what the screening looks like for your guys?
Please. I can do a little bit of that, yeah.
Please say no if I don't want to ask you to say something that you're not allowed to.
So we definitely do like a more general movement screen, and then we move on to something more specific to the sport and specific to that player and the positions that they play, because I think both of those things are important. And then, we also do your basic, like what you would do with your physios, or our athletic trainers do their assessments. And then we look at, your basic, anything from aerobic capacity to your power and based on those things and knowing for these people, this is what we need, this is where they've been, this is where we're trying to get them to. Maybe this has gotten worse or this has gotten better. We can then say, okay, of these areas, here are the big rocks we need to address first. And then we build from there. So making sure that we start with the basics like anybody would in terms of your general movement patterns, and then going from that to the very specific baseball stuff. And there's a ton of great ones out there, and we've taken so many continuing education courses and classes and taken the things from each of those that we really loved, that we felt were meaningful for our group, and adapted them to create a little bit of our own thing, which has been cool.
Your own twist. One thing you mentioned was the importance and the success of the buy-in that you've had from the players. I'm guessing there'll be organizations where that's potentially not the case, whether that be in baseball or football or wherever. What particularly have you done? I know you mentioned trying to always relate that back to the sport, but is there anything else that you've tried to do, or what's maybe specific to your group that's been good, that's allowed that buy-in to be so successful?
So definitely at the developmental level, we put a lot of emphasis on education for our players. So we make sure that each of the different departments spends time with those guys explaining what we do and our philosophies as an organization and as a team, so that they understand, okay, this is for this, and this is why we do this, and this is who does that, so that they know this person helps me with this person helps me with this. I used to laugh when I would go visit the affiliates, our developmental teams last season, because they'd be like, oh, you're the workload lady. But I mean, I know all of them. I knew them after spring training. They'd be like, guess how much I did of this, and I'm sleeping better, and I'm this, and I'm that. So they understood, and they would ask questions, and we really pride ourselves on being able to scout guys and have them come up through our org and make it to our major league team. So a lot of our young guys are homegrown, which is cool. So they've had that education and understanding. And even with our older guys that are already here, we make sure day one, you come to our team, we're assessing you, we're explaining kind of things, how they work, who does what, making sure that we help them understand what their goals are as players and the things that we do that can help to support that. So there's a lot of that. And then also, because we have so many guys that have come up through our system and know why we do things and believe in it and know that it helps them, they tend to kind of indoctrinate the others as well, which is really cool. So a lot of my young guys, like, they want to do the different tests and things that we offer and have available, because they want to know, am I better? Where am I at? Like, maybe I felt this today. Can we check this? So they understand what the tools are that are available to them and how they can use it to be better athletes. And I think that's something that's really helped all along the way, is they understand this is for this and this is how it helps. And we make sure that we continue to, as a group, have a cohesive message for the players.
Yeah. So you mentioned the camera system that's available in game. How are you? And again, I don't want to ask too many questions, so please say I can't talk about that if that's the case.
Sure.
But in terms of tech or ways that you're quantifying pitches, how you're quantifying the loads that is going through these guys in practice, are you able to wear wearables during that time? Is there anything specific that you're using? The only reason I come back to an experience I had with Catapult, and they were trying to develop, or they did develop at one point, a pitching metric, so it counted pitches. They've done a similar thing in cricket over here. But is there anything that you guys are using similar to that, or gone another way with regards to practice?
So with the camera system, our goal is just to understand what are the demands on the field.
Okay.
You know, we also, in addition to the camera system, we also have coaches out watching and monitoring what's happening too, because we want to make sure that we don't miss anything. And always with technology, it's extremely helpful when it works, and when it doesn't, you need to have a backup plan.
Gosh.
So we do, and for us, it just gives us a bigger picture of everything happening for these guys, and then helps us kind of work backwards. So in practice, we know that this is what was happening in the game. And so that may mean the next day that their skills work time changes as a result of what happened in the game or what didn't happen in the game. You know, we're always just trying to think of these things as dials, right? Like we dial up the baseball work, or we dial up the S&C work, or the conditioning, depending on the needs and what did or didn't happen in a game. So for us, it's just giving us a guide to know, okay, this is what he's been doing, and maybe that's changed and we need to make sure that he can still do that, or maybe it's increased and we need to figure out how to adjust other things. So for us, it's just toggles and ways to balance. And so for us, that's key. Ultimately, again, their job is to play baseball, and skills work. If they're working on something like a mechanical change, that may require more. So for us, it's not even necessarily that we have tech quantifying that. We use different things for sure, but understanding that the volume and intensity has gone up there, so somewhere else we need to adjust.
Gosh.
And so for us, that's kind of where that comes in. So it's big picture. What is the athlete doing? What have they done? Where are they at now? What do we have upcoming? And then for each of these areas, these, you know, buckets or whatever, what can we adjust? Do we need to adjust? Do they need more actually? Do they need less? How are they feeling? So it just gives us like little ways to fine tune for each person. So for us, the camera system is great because it gives us another like set of eyes that always looks at things the same way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we can look at what we saw and what they've been doing, what a couple days before looked like, and say, okay, we know we have this upcoming. They also have travel across several time zones. They also have this, they have that. All right, what do we need to do? So for us, that's kind of been key. And each department uses technology a little bit differently. So for skills coaches, again, it kind of goes back to what is the question you're trying to answer? What do you need to know? So for certain skills coaches, you know, technology in the bullpen can be really useful for them to see, you know, has release angle changed, has velo changed, has spin rate changed, all these different things that they use. Whereas for us in S&C, it's more a factor of like, did they do more skills work? Did they do less? Was it more intense? And what are the other things that are happening for this player so that we can, on our end, tweak what we do?
Awesome. I couldn't go a full episode with you in baseball without discussing recovery. With the crazy schedule, especially now, like I said before, even more crazy. What's your philosophy when it comes to recovery and ensuring these guys can not only go tonight but go tomorrow, the next day, with all the factors, physiological and psychological that we've discussed already?
Mm-hmm. Recovery is super important to us as well, and our guys are really, thankfully, quite good at letting us know when they're feeling tired or they're feeling things. A lot of them have really good, like that kinesthetic awareness to let us know, like, hey, my legs feel really tired, or I feel really slow today, or whatever it is. And so that we, on our end, are able to say, okay, here are a couple tools that might work really well for that. And I think instead of doing everything all the time, you want to kind of pick and choose in the same way and periodize what you do with recovery. Especially like in the off season, we're not pushing recovery modalities, all of them all at once. It's hard, right? Because we're trying to really push that load in the weight room and conditioning. And they have more time to sleep. They have more time to recover because the demands are less. So they're, you know, we're not as worried unless something comes up and they need something and we give them a little bit more. But when we get into hard parts of the season and hard parts of the schedule, that's when we can start to incorporate more recovery modalities and get a little bit more bang for our buck with those, because it's a new stimulus and their body's not already used to those things. So what's nice is each guy kind of has their own formula and what works for them, and they know that. And we also continue to take classes and bring people in and figure out what we have available and what's out there so that we can continue to provide that for our guys. We also, again, with like supplement strategies can be useful, making sure they're sleeping. Last year, we got a lot of our guys on the blue light blockers because they love playing video games.
Yeah.
I think everybody does.
Yeah.
So I was like, look, if you're going to be up playing video games, like, I get it. Especially for a lot of our guys, like, you have all that adrenaline going into a game. You're a starter at 7 p.m. You play 7 innings, or you're playing 9 innings, as a position player. And you leave the park at midnight and you're just like amped up.
Yeah.
And while video games is not like my first choice, what can I do so I'm not forcing them to do too much that's completely different? That would help. So blue light blockers for our younger guys that share rooms on the road, eye mask, earplugs for some of them, things like that, where we can tweak how they sleep or help improve recovery in some capacity. Even something as simple as like when they're really, lower body fatigue, putting your legs up a wall. So like a yoga pose, but it helps bring your nervous system down. You can do it anywhere. It's expensive. Even meditation, things like that. So we make sure that we have a lot of options available, and that we also keep track of what works really well for certain players in certain contexts, so that we know, okay, this guy had a really hard night. We might want to have him come do this. That way we can kind of adjust from there.
Mm-hmm. So you got almost like a menu that these guys are able to tap into?
Not formally written down for them, but yes, they know if they come to us and they say like, hey, I'm feeling a little tired, I'm feeling a little sore, I'm feeling general fatigue, whatever it is, they know that we have a series of options available for this person. We might say, hey, this works really well for you. We used it back at this point. This might be a good time to use that, or have you been doing this? You might want to try this, but always starting with the less is more approach, just because adherence is important and getting them to do it. So we start with what's the low hanging fruit that they're not doing that we can do first, and then kind of go from there.
Is there any specific modalities that are more popular with your guys in terms of recovery strategies?
I think honestly for each guy it's very different, and I think too age is very much a factor.
Okay.
Our younger guys, I would say, like, once, it's funny, we were talking about this, once guys get to be around 30 is when you start to see a lot more time spent on, like prehab exercises and stretching and things like that. They take a bit more time to warm up and recover than our younger guys that are super resilient and bounce back quickly. And each guy, I think when you're younger, you're still kind of learning. So you try everything, or there's a senior player and you like him and you think he does good stuff, so you do what he's doing. I also try to demonstrate so that people ask questions and are like, what's that? How does that work? What do you do? So that they, generally when they come to you and they want to know, that's a really great learning opportunity and a way to introduce new things. So everything from, your hot, cold to your Normatex to, even just doing like an aerobic session can be really useful for some guys. So it just, for each person, it depends. Positionally too, pitchers are obviously going to do things arm care wise that are different than position players that aren't throwing nearly as much or as hard. So that's kind of how it is. But we have a lot of different tools and a lot of guys that gravitate towards different things. I guess the hardest part about traveling, you take everything with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess over 30, they're starting to think how long I've got left. I've got to really take care of myself. Everything like recovery becomes a little bit more vigilant and prehab and all that kind of stuff naturally.
Yeah, and I mean it's a hormonal thing too, right? Like especially for men, I think it's right around 28 is when you hormonally peak, and then for each guy it's different. But if you can imagine, with the amount of volume, your hormonal profiles are going to completely change from the start of the season to the end, even in your body composition, just because for some guys it's hard to keep weight on because you're playing so much. And there's just a lot of things that change. So I think as you get older and as you've been playing for a longer and longer time, that's going to happen naturally.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think that's a good way to round it up. But if anyone wants to dive into your PhD or ask you any more questions, where's the best place for people to contact you, Kate?
Definitely check out I think my thesis is just posted online. And Kate Weiss at AUT is where I published my whole thing. So you can find that online, along with a lot of other papers I've published over time. And here at the Dodgers is a great place to find me. We're pretty active on social media, and we have some big projects coming up for the general population in terms of baseball performance. So definitely stay tuned to see kind of what's going on there, and always feel free to reach out to me via email.
Awesome. Because you did a symposium, a little conference, well, not little, but a conference from you guys. Is that going to happen again post-COVID, hopefully?
So yeah, definitely
Okay.
we'd love to bring that back. But
Yeah.
in the interim, we're working on some other virtual options that
Awesome.
be kind of taking place towards the end of the year. So definitely stay tuned for that, because it was great.
Perfect.
It's a great way we keep everyone connected too. So it's a good networking opportunity.
Absolutely. Does the department have a Twitter handle? Do you guys put it out on an individual Twitter, or is it everyone's Twitter?
We're working on that.
Okay.
I know right now, actually, our director of performance posts weekly workouts that everyone can do on through the Dodgers. So you can tune in and jump on YouTube and do a workout with them. It's one of the stuff we do with our guys, which is pretty cool. But yes, we'll be posting through the Dodgers and getting all of our social media up and running in the next couple of weeks here.
Superb. Well, thank you very much for your time, Kate. Really appreciate you fitting me into the current chaos.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.